What's going on, guys? TG or Thunder God here. Today I'm with, who am I with today?
So you would BD Boro again,
He,
baby. The
he
new
has,
swag and Seth,
yes,
apparently.
yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. And today we're talking about a heavily requested matchup. I didn't think it was, but people really wanted me to talk about this. So I said, let me get Voro on this. And this is a bit of a what if. I decided let's spin the video a little bit. It's what if Shisui fought Obito during the time of the Uchiha Massacre? Like he was just taking Itachi's place, whether Itachi died early or he's just not present in the story. Or maybe Shisui never got attacked by Danzo and Obito intervened because the Uchiha being alive and well would intervene with his plans, which actually makes a bit of sense. All of that. So it's a bit of a what if they fought, how would the fight go? We're going to be talking about how the fight would go, their abilities, their scaling, kind of like how they interact with each other, maybe a bit of a bloodlusted scenario at the end of it all. So with that being said, make sure to like and subscribe if you're new here. Go subscribe to Voro 2. He's gonna be dropping some sauce soon, you know what I'm saying? So definitely go do that. Big sauce, big sauce. So with that being said, let's get right into the video, guys. So starting off, I guess we'll talk about like before we get into the what if, I kind of want to establish like where these characters are. I know Voro definitely wants to do the same thing, kind of give us an idea of like what we're talking about with these characters. I guess we'll start with Chisui first since he's a bit more tricky. Do you want to lead with this? Do you kind of, I know you have a bit to say on him. Yeah, what's your take on Chisui?
I think what we need to do is we need to like not talk about Kodo Matsukami in the Genjutsu side of things.
Yeah.
Because that's its own like big conversation that is very ambiguous and very interpretational, if you will. So if we were to talk about Shisui and his scaling, a lot of people like to bring up, oh, he's inferior to Danzo, or he would lose to like the third Hokage's ball sack. Like I've actually seen that, and it's disturbing. But so to talk about like him versus Danzo, there's like two versions of it. There is the game version, and there's like I guess the quote unquote anime filler, because it doesn't take place in the manga. And in the anime filler, which I don't know if we want to stick with that, I guess as the main version. But in the anime filler, it's kind of like Shisui hits Danzo with a Genjutsu after Danzo confronts him on he wants to take his eyes. And then after that, he puts him into a Genjutsu. He then turns around, starts walking away under the assumption that he is under a Genjutsu.
Yeah.
Danzo then rips out his eye, and from there he's nerfed. And then in the games, it's kind of made more out like Shisui's kind of a wimp, because he then gets like surrounded by Anbu members and he has to like run away, which is like a little questionable at his terms of power.
Yeah.
Especially when he was dealing at them at like the age of like 10 or however young he was. And so from there he then fights Danzo and he's like sweating with his Sharingan out.
They're like
he gets
evenly
sneaked up
matched.
from behind. Yeah, that too. It's like really weird. And then he gets snuck up from behind and his eyes get ripped out. And from there he's like, he also gets poisoned too, but that's after his eye gets ripped out.
I
So
think
it's like,
I think there's a big like the main thing to look at is well, like whichever canon you want to go with. I know there's that interview statement about the like these game cutscenes and like how they're canon. I believe it more so applies to Generations. I haven't seen anything regarding Revolution. If somebody has it, you know, put it down below, please. I'd love to see it. But you know, regarding these two canons, like the main consistency here is that especially considering the Itachi light novel as well, is that pre-Mangekyo Sharingan, Shisui's a little bit above Itachi, like he's just kind of superior, but they're kind of keeping track in terms of like their sparring sessions. And he also gets his eye ripped out and taken by Danzo. And you could like argue over the circumstances in which that took place, but those are the main like really sticking points that I think we should focus on in terms of like looking at Shisui in relation to all these events, especially since he's such a he's a very lore heavy character. I guess we could talk about some of his like lore in like, I guess that would be a good time to point out. And we'll get back to the Danzo point, but Chisui's very impressive. He's got a lot of good statements, which everybody knows. There's like a good statement in the novel where the Uchiha had planned to take on the third Hokage, right? Hiruzen needs no introduction, and this is a more prime Hiruzen than the one that like took on Orochimaru, and you know even was compared to like the 5 Kage. And essentially, like, Shisui's death was a setback for them. Like, it's this big deal that this one member of this clan would like slow down their entire movement, to slow down, like, pretty much stop, like, pretty much put forward the coup on the Hidden Leaf. Like, his death was a big, like, issue for that. So I think that just really says something about his strength, that they lost confidence a little bit in their ability to take on the third Hokage in the Leaf just because they lost one of these members. And that just kind of speaks to his lore capabilities. Anything you want to add on to that?
I think like you can potentially scale him off of Hiruzen here, and maybe you could say this is a supporting way to put him above Danzo and debunk that whole Danzo thing. But I think like the whole, as you said, like it's very impressive that he's implied to be like one of this huge contriving factors, or not contriving, one of these major factors for stop in the eventual assassination of third Hokage. So I do think that is interesting, and if you do scale off of Hiruzen and maybe look at like what he's done in the war, it does give Shisui a pretty big power buff, which I've talked about on my channel before.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of really good like lore, you know, scaling for Shisui. And even if you want to go with that novel statement with Itachi and Obito being somewhat compared to as like rivals or enemies, pretty much there was like it was just, it's a weird statement. They talk about like there's like murderous intent and like equal respect during the statement. But my main issue with that statement is that that's like Shisui and Itachi are only compared before Itachi actually gets his Mangekyo Sharingan. So you could imply like this statement doesn't even portray to him because Shisui was only stronger than like pre-MS Itachi. Now that also gets into like the amp the MS gives. Like we know it amps like the chakra like multiple times over. It talks about that, like the techniques, the Sharingan techniques, it like multiplies them. Whether or not it boosted Itachi's base stats, I think is somewhat debatable. People might bring up the Kage Summit, but Sasuke getting blatantly stronger was more so due to his hatred over like anything else. Not to say like getting your Mangekyo Sharingan doesn't buff all your stats. I just think using the Sasuke example, which a lot of people do, is like not really indicative of Itachi in this situation. I think you agree with me on that one.
Yeah, I think it's debatable. I'll say that.
It's debatable, right? Yeah, I think it is very debatable.
Yeah, because I've seen a lot of people use it, and not to like appeal to some like weird popularity, like
no, I'm playing. Yeah, go.
Yeah. Jeez, I wonder who those people could be. But not to like, you know, appeal to popularity, but there definitely is a reason and a way to interpret the argument of Obito and Itachi being equals. You can throw in Shisui there. I do think that is valid.
Yeah.
It's not out of the realm at all.
And I guess we should we kind of covered like Shisui a little bit. I guess we'll move on to Obito at this point. Obito's really weird at this time frame too. Like he's just so this is a weird version of Obito.
Inconsistent,
he's
in my opinion.
a little bit. Oh, I mean, I guess so. For the sake of this video, we'll be using him with like his, you know, Minato fight like feats and stuff like that, just cause really there's no way to say if he got weaker or stronger. There's actually zero way. You can just kind of say he stayed the same there, at least I've seen. But essentially, you know, we got this fighter who can, you know, combat Minato. You guys have heard the whole 9 yards. You know, Minato then kind of fondues him by, you know, teleporting with Flying Raijin. Then the Uchiha Massacre occurs, and, you know, he's compared to Itachi, which we just previously discussed. And how you interpret that statement is really up to you. It could just mean they're relative, or the fact that they have mutual respect for each other, or they're both detrimental to each other's long-term plans. It could go a number of ways. Whichever one, you know, really feel free to explore that. You know, it doesn't really make a difference to me. But I think a big consistency here is like, I guess it kind of gets into like the fight almost, because like it would be Obito's MO. Like I feel like this is one of those fights where Obito either like wins off bat, or it's gonna be really hard for him to win here. Just cause like we're gonna get into it. There's not really too much to say about Obito really. He's got a couple good statements as well compared to Shisui in the novel. For one, Itachi like senses Obito's presence and like chakra and like killer intent. And it's above everybody he's ever felt before, including his father and the third Hokage. So you could maybe infer that he thinks like Obito's a bigger threat than those two individuals in his mind. So both of these individuals have comparisons to the third Hokage, which is really interesting. But Obito's just an interesting character at this point in the series. I think like he's similar to Shisui at this point, where he's really just kind of featless. Not to say like he doesn't have previous feats, but like he doesn't really do much. He just kind of hangs around and kills a bunch of like no-name Uchiha and stuff like that. And then there's like
yeah. To add on to this as well, it's like like some people can, they're kind of a little bipolar on the whole Obito Minato thing, and I guess like it really depends on what the argument present is and what you're debating.
Yeah.
But it's really not like Obito scaled to Minato there. Like you never really saw a direct landing of an attack on Minato. Maybe you could be like, oh, he caught him off guard with Kamui and he teleported behind him, but like at the same time you could say he wasn't on guard because he just like used a ton of his chakra from the Nine Tails and he running away with all this stuff, blah blah blah. It's kind of like, I don't think using the Minato fight to be like, oh, Obito is equal to Minato, blah blah blah, he then like, I don't think that's valid.
Minato was also just like teleporting the Nine Tails and the big Bijou bombs, which like he says teleporting big things, not teleporting in general, fatigues him. So here's the way I'll put it. We have like pretty much Obito like has some really good lore statements and some possible scaling to Itachi and Minato, both of which Shisui also are kind of compared to, which is really interesting. Now me and Voro don't really think like the Minato fight is like the best way to scale Obito, just because Obito kind of got dog walked by a fatigued Minato. I'm gonna say how it is. So it is what it is. Minato thought he was impressive, but I guess not that impressive. So the way
you could just say he's being humble.
Yeah, Minato's also very humble as a character. He doesn't like to, like show off, like even in comparison to the other not Gokage, but like the other Hokage. So just a lot of like interesting things to go off of. But I guess if you want to get really like let me cement this for everybody. Obito is very comparable to this Itachi at this moment. So is Shisui. Obito and Chisui are both compared somewhat to the third Hokage. And both Obito and Shisui are compared to Minato, if not in ability and nothing else. So it's just really like they're just compared a lot to the same characters. So I think this makes for like a really interesting versus battle at this point in the series. But I think that's really it. Anything you want to say on like the scaling? Anything else with that?
I think I think a lot of people will probably be like, oh wow, this is all there is for scaling. But to be honest, there's not a lot because they really only have one fight directly. And there's not a lot you can pull from it because in both instances, they're either fighting someone nerfed or they are nerfed when they're fighting.
Yeah.
So it's like, you kind of can't really pull an exact quantification or define the like exact scaling on both sides. Maybe if you were to take some of the lore, which we'll get into later, that lore can then be defined and we can quantify that to a certain level for both scalings.
Yeah.
But as like a base level, here's what they've done for feats. There's not a lot you can pull from.
Honestly, I could go through Obito's like scaling, like if you want, we've all heard it. Like Minato thinks like his movements are dangerous and he's more, threatening than Pain, and Pain's like the strongest man in the Akatsuki. So I guess that means he's stronger than Sick Itachi. Man, you've heard it all. Like I don't need to go through this for you. You know what I'm saying? Let's get to the meat of it. Let's get to the good stuff. So this is where we talk about their abilities now, because this is gonna play into when we talk about how we think the fight would actually go, and how they interact with each other's abilities. So I guess we could start off with body flicker. I think this is really interesting. So we know like pretty much Chisui is like very, very, very like he's pretty much wanked off with his body flicker abilities. He has a lot of statements with him being like unparalleled, him being the best, him just being like this body flicker god. And it's just very interesting because Minato's like also hyped up to this same degree. He's a master of body flicker. And it kind of begs the question of like why Minato didn't use body flicker against Obito in their fight. Possibly because he thought it wouldn't be as effective against Obito, which might be consistent since he also thinks Obito has better, time, space, teleportation. So he just really didn't think like body flicker would work. You could also say maybe it took up too much chakra, but we've never seen body flicker be a technique that like was heavily draining to individuals. And if Minato can teleport casually with flying Raijin, like I wouldn't see like body flicker being any different. What would you want to
add on to this?
Yeah.
So I think this is also something to add on to, is it's actually considered a D rank jutsu.
Yes,
Which
yes.
many people many people actually utilize this to speed around and to travel quicker. And the fact that it's utilized so much and it's considered such a low class jutsu, it does kind of put into perspective that you can kind of spam this quite a bit and
Uh-huh.
it wouldn't take up a lot of your chakra.
Yeah, and it's like you got people like Part 1 Gara and like Haku using it. So it's like now I know Haku's like comparable in the war arcs. It'll kill me on that example, but we've seen Genin use it very confidently. So it doesn't give off the impression that it takes a heavy chakra toll on Shisui, but the idea that Minato really didn't use it in the fight kind of gives off the impression that it wouldn't really have been effective versus Obito. I know Shisui's body flicker is a bit more different. It's more so akin to like te- teleportation, but also sort of after images. If you go off that filler fight he has in the anime, that where he's fighting those two Anbu with Itachi, that also might not be effective like against Obito, just because like if he's just phasing through them, what is it really gonna do anything? And then Obito could just track where the real one is. It doesn't really seem like body flicker is that much of a game changer. It might be in conjunction with some of Shisui's other techniques. I definitely think it would be, but what's your kind of take on this, Voro? With like the whole, Shisui the teleporter, this guy's after images, he has all this
Yeah.
crazy stuff. What's your little like perspective on it?
So I think if we were to since we kind of already established that there is a very big comparison for both Shisui and Obito to Minato, whether
Yeah.
that is valid or whatever, right? We can,
Yeah.
That's up to you guys, I suppose. But for this, it's kind of like a nerfed Minato with his raw speed. He uses Flying Raijin when he lands the final hit, but his raw speed then able to then use Flying Raijin to then where Obito is not even able to react,
Mm-hmm.
and he gets hit with a Rasengan later,
Yeah.
to where he then we then get the mental process of what he was saying in his head, where he's like, oh, he teleported on top of me and then slammed the Rasengan.
Yeah.
So Minato has very fast reaction times at his base speed. So what we can do is you can use the lore we've given of the comparison, and we can say, well, he then enhances his base speed. Whether that makes him as fast as Minato's base speed or not, that's a little bit a little ambiguous. But the base speed is what is at least being compared to, where he's then enhancing it, so we can at least say it's at least relative.
Yeah, I
From
think
there,
I
you
think
can
it
then
wouldn't be
say-
outlandish.
Yeah. So you can then say he can land attacks from that point, just based off of him enhancing it, and creating doppelgangers as well, off of illusions of speed alone. That's pretty quick and crazy fast, as a matter of fact. I don't really quite remember how fast it is, but I have seen the calc.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's no, it's pretty it's an interesting technique. I guess you would have to imply Obito also can't perceive which if he does use that after image body flicker, that Obito can't perceive which one's the real one, which I think that's a bit I don't think I see that being I don't think I see that being the case.
It's such a weird argument. It's oh, he can use it like a shadow clone, so he can target the wrong one. It's even then he's still there. He's just flashing between the 2 points or multiple points, that is. So it's that's such a weird argument.
Yeah. And I think the next thing to really talk about too is the Susanoo. So do you want to tackle this? What's your stake on the green goblin over here? What's your stake on it?
So we didn't really, correct me if I'm wrong, we didn't really get to see the Susanoo in the Itachi flashbacks.
No. So
really,
this is if you go with the game game canon that whether you want to say portrays to the manga or anime, do whatever you want.
Which I do think there needs to be a distinction of the Storm for final or full power or no, what's it called? I'm hard blanking on it. The
Perfect
final stage
Susanoo.
Perfect Susanoo. Yeah. A hard blanking on it. Yeah, the perfect Susanoo That's in Storm 4, where even if you were to say, oh, Revolution in the scenes are canon, it's like that the perfect Susanoo is in the Storm 4 game, so
Yeah.
that isn't considered canon. Maybe if you were to give some like weird pseudo argument of, oh, you're playing through the story or blah blah blah.
Yeah, hell no.
That's its own argument, whatever. But when we see it in the game, he is using it in conjunction with him, one, being poisoned, and him, two, having his eye ripped out, which he would then be losing chakra in both instances. So the fact that he's holding it up and fighting off against Anbu and Danzo is pretty impressive.
Yeah. He just gets jumped, like, and he's losing blood while also, like, having his bodily functions deteriorated by poison. So it's like he's just getting, like, attacked, like, from internal, like, there's a lot of internal damage going on at that moment while he's getting attacked from the outside. So, like, that fight, him using the Susanoo the way he did, I don't think would be indicative of how he would actually use it. Let's say he fought Obito.
Yeah. So with the Susanoo, it's like he does have the ability with, they call it Tsukumo, and it's pretty interesting because it like takes out like the fleets of the Anbu, and like I don't know if like maybe like I don't really think Anbu is in terms of power is relative to Obito in this case, but it's interesting that like he can like almost one-shot them, and it's noted for like being incredibly fast as well, which if like this is kind of a little of a I guess a headcanon, but what if he like amps the needles or himself, which would include the Susanoo as well if he's in the Susanoo, with body flicker.
I was just like, can he body flicker the Susanoo? Like, I mean, I don't think the weird thing is with the Susanoo, right? Like it's weird to discuss because we do know like it moves with the individual. So there really isn't nothing like any. I feel like it's not outlandish to say he could body flicker with the Susanoo, since like when Sasuke jumps, like it jumps. Now he's not gonna be able to make like 7 of them, but him moving with it, I don't see like that being really outlandish. So we could see some body flicker Susanoo. We've seen that in the series before as well. Not body flicker Susanoo, but like people moving in the Susanoo following.
We have seen the Susanoo actually be manipulated before. This is like with the spirit weapons though, because like I've talked about this in the Itachi video, but in the anime we openly and like directly see the shield get bigger. So it makes me wonder if like the user can control parts of the Susanoo and do that. I think Madara also, he manipulates the Susanoo as well. I could be wrong.
Sasuke does it with the infinite Tsukuyomi, and Itachi also does it when he's on his like deathbed and like he's walking out of it. So I feel like to say it's possible to like walk outside the Susanoo, I feel like that's not outlandish, especially
and Kakashi also does that. Yeah.
Oh yes. And I believe it was like dying too, but it was it's very possible. It's just like it's kind of the idea that like when they stop holding the Susanoo, it begins to crumble, kind of like when Madara does when he gets thrown out of it. So I think it is honestly possible. So we could see body flicker plus Susanoo as well. And if he does use that barrage of needle technique, like it really could give him an opening for Obito to like take Obito out. Now that does get into Kamui, so I'm gonna save my thoughts on it. But I do think like no, any of these scenarios, they are not outlandish at all to say. So Chisui is definitely an animal with that. I'm gonna skip the Genjutsu because I know you thirsty bastards are here for it, so I'm not gonna talk about it yet. We're gonna swing over to some of Obito's techniques. Kamui, we all know it. We've all heard about it. Phase through everything. Possible unconscious like use of Kamui. This is gonna be the biggest thing or one of the biggest things for Chisui to come at. Honestly, just to be frank, like, I'm gonna save that for the what if, but it's gonna be a real issue for him because honestly, he doesn't really have like any of these like crazy hacks besides his Genjutsu. So for example, right, people argue, well, would the Totsuka blade work on like Obito? Well, like, Chisui doesn't really have anything like that, like in his arsenal. He doesn't like a lot of his techniques wouldn't really be able to do anything. So it would be similar to how Minato won, if anything. Like if he's gonna go for it, it's gonna be some, nonsense where he teleports the moment Obito materializes. So really interesting there. I don't want to spend too much time on Kamui. I feel like everybody knows about it. Like that's not something that needs too much explanation. You know what I'm saying? Like Like
Yeah.
you guys get it, yeah. Any thoughts on Kamui as well? You want to bring up anything?
I will say this: I think if Obito uses Kamui, that is an instant GG if he puts him into the dimension.
Agreed.
Because he has no way to get out, so it's kind of like BFR, like.
Agreed.
Um, but like maybe you could like argue some weird body flicker headcanon where he can like speed out of it, which like then gets kind of like into the idea of like did he perceive it fast enough, which a little ambiguous for us to like determine here, just because like not enough is known. So.
You could say maybe he couldn't body flicker, since you could maybe imply like Minato would have done it instead of just teleporting, which like logically would have taken more chakra. So you know, it's possible. I just that's an example of that. I think that's actually, is that it for Obito? Is that all he has? I mean, he has.
I will say that's pretty much it for relative or not relative, relevant jutsus, because like he has a fire jutsu, cool, like not really a big deal.
Yeah, like fire
then,
style. Yeah, like whatever.
Yeah, then after that you get into like, okay, he has other genjutsus, which that's a whole discussion we'll get into, and then there's pretty much is a Sharingan abilities. Everything else is not really relevant for this stage of Obito.
Yeah. I really, unless like you give him Nine Tails, which I mean, no. So
I think that's a whole different discussion too.
Yeah. It's yeah. So that's really it, to be honest. So I guess we gotta tackle it now. The big one, the big hurdle. Kodo Matsukami. Woo! All right, do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first? Like, what's the word on this?
I'll start off with the Genjutsu, just because I think to talk about Kodo Matsukami and get the best idea about how we're gonna approach this whole thing is let's just blatantly talk about Genjutsu.
Let's segue into it. Yeah, I'm with you.
So I brought this up to TG, and I've seen a lot of people when bringing up Genjutsu is they'll often fall for the idea of, well, if you're stronger, you can then neg any Genjutsu or dojutsu that is beneath you. It says never really, like, we've never really seen this, to be honest. Like, maybe you can point out to like, oh, well, the Renegons can counter Renegons, but that's really more Renegons here. We're talking about the more Sharingan, Mangekyo levels, that kind of stuff. The other thing is, we actually kind of see, and it's implied the opposite, where Fugaku then makes a statement of, oh, he can then control the Nine Tails, where the Nine Tails is stronger than Fugaku, because if you want to scale him off of like the Sannin and say he's like greater than the Sannin, then we know people like Pain can body Jiraiya, who is a Sannin, so he would be kind of in that same tier.
Mm-hmm.
Pain then gets nagged by a weaker Nine Tails. That's the half version of the Nine Tails, not the full Nine Tails that Fugaku can name, or that he says he can put under a Genjutsu. So right there, he's not as powerful as the Nine Tails, but he implies that he can put the Nine Tails under a Genjutsu. And to like support that as well, we then have statements like Itachi in the data book, which I don't know if TG wants to show like that whole statement because it is a really long statement, but it's like very like, it hints more at the idea of fourth dimensional Genjutsu. So there is that also, which is like, even if you are physically stronger, like say Madara pops up and Itachi hits him with Tsukiyomi, right? You can argue that because it's fourth dimensional and Madara is not fourth dimensional, he would then be under the Genjutsu. And both sides here have major arguments. Why this is relevant though is because even if you were to be like, well, Obito is physically stronger and he has more, he's more chatty and buff and bulkier, you then have Kodo Matsukami, where there is showing the statements, as I said earlier, where it could affect Obito. And I do think it isn't exactly correct just to say, oh, he's more Chad and buffer, so he can neg it, kind of. I think that approach is definitely more nomadic than what you should actually more so think about it.
I do want to add on to that too, because I like what you're saying. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about. For one, right, I think these two characters are relative enough at this point in the series to where they're not outside their respective realms in terms of Genjutsu. Like, I don't think one outclasses the other. Like, I don't think one of any of like either are really that much stronger to the point where like they would brush off a Genjutsu. And like an example of this is what I mean. Like, so for example, like Sasuke in the Kage Summit, like he'll try and fire off a Sharingan Genjutsu at the Raikage, and he's like, huh, weak Sharingan Genjutsu. And then he'll go like to Madara, and Madara will just like finesse him like easily with it. Like a base, like yeah. So it's like there is like a bit of like a power level difference with like Genjutsu. Like you're just stronger. You can, Ungus Chungus somebody with that kind of stuff. So I definitely agree, and I definitely don't think that's the case here, like with one being like inherently far above the other. I definitely don't think there's that big gap in terms of Genjutsu. Obito also has good statements for his Genjutsu. Now the interesting thing about Obito's Genjutsu is that in I believe it's third or fourth data book, it refers to him as Madara being the only person alive that can control the Nine Tails. This is somewhat interesting since Itachi's also alive at the point this statement's being made. So it kind of begs the question, like, is Obito's like base Sharingan like visual prowess above that of like Itachi, who has like this crazy Genjutsu? Is this also due to Itachi's illness? You could definitely chalk it up to that. Possibly because like his jutsu wouldn't be as potent. This also gets into the idea whether or not you think Obito got stronger over those how many years it was till like Shippuden. Some people think he doesn't, some people think he does. Whatever the case is, I'm just gonna say he stays stagnant. I think that's relatively consistent. You could maybe say Itachi stays stagnant too, or Itachi gets stronger. If anything, there's evidence to say Itachi got weaker, but just an interesting note on Obito's Genjutsu and how like it kind of relates to Itachi. But going back to this, I definitely don't see like normal Genjutsu being a finisher for either of these opponents in their fight. Just kind of a point on that. I don't know if you agree with me, Voro, on that. I just don't see it like.
Yeah.
I think yeah.
I want to add on to that statement you had said, because you had said about Obito's Genjutsu and what it's compared to. Because while that could be compared to his base, that could also be talking about Itachi's base versus his Mangekyo. And that's also in the world where Shisui is dead as well. So this is very like... Wait, no. Would he be dead at this point?
It's made in Shippuden. And it could also be talking about all of their abilities too. Yeah, you're straight now. Yeah.
Woo! Okay. Yeah, so that is also something. So you could argue right there that like he's being compared to either not a peak version Genjutsu and someone who's dead, as well as Fugaku, who is also stated to be able to control the Nine Tails, who at that point was also dead as well. So even then, that statement you can argue is kind of like very niche, and it's like only really I guess relevant at that point in time. It doesn't really mean much after that.
Yeah. I think we move on to the big one now. The big so you want to I guess so I'll actually take the lead on this. I'm gonna take the lead on this, and then I'm gonna let you because I think there's a couple of different ways to talk about this. So Kodo Matsukami, right? Like the Genjutsu that controls you without realizing it. So there's the question of like if this would work on Obito. Let's look at like who it would work on. Well, we know it would work on Fugaku, who also has a Mangekyo Sharingan. We know also would work on Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan Sasuke, or in Itachi's mind it would. You could maybe imply Itachi like was overestimating its power as well. That's certainly a possibility.
It also works on Itachi.
Yeah, it also works on Itachi. So it does work on a lot of very potent people. Now, interesting thing is like Obito's actually exposed to Shisui's eye. Pretty much when Danzo has it during the 5 Kage Summit, Obito's just kind of lounging around. He's like lounging around while Sasuke fights Danzo, right? And he's like, oh, he's waiting till Shisui's eye is active, right? And then it activates, and he's just right in front of Danzo. So he kind of doesn't even show fear when confronted with the idea of having Kodo Matsukami like shot at him. He doesn't really he's never shown really shaken from it. He's shown great confidence with it. So you could maybe imply like he's just, it wouldn't affect him at that point. You could also imply maybe he had some sort of counter to it built up from, knowledge or prep time. Also, whether this same Obito would have that knowledge, debatable, but I think it is worth noting that he just didn't show any real fear to it. But it also is interesting to note that Kodo Matsukami hasn't pretty much affected like arguably stronger fighters as well. So it's kind of like weird to talk about, but I know Vora wants to get into this too. What's your take on it?
I think so. I also want to add on to that. It would have also, like, if you take the statements with it being compared to Hiruzen, I think that's also pretty prevalent as well. Like, they can work on Hiruzen, which is likely what they would have used him for, because they just needed a strong, like any strong shinobi, they would have gotten Fugaku or Minato or Orochimaru even. So I think that even being compared to Hiruzen is also pretty impressive as well. But when it comes to Kodo Matsukami, there's like a ton of theories and ideas that you get into. One of the more notable ones is, like, am I allowed to name drop, TG?
You can name drop in this video.
Okay. So one of the more popular ones is Swag Kage's theory. Now, not to say Swag's theory is wrong or correct, it's more loose, if that makes sense, because it's based off of a lot of circumstantial evidence, as well as it doesn't take into consideration what I had mentioned earlier of you can, like really dojutsu levels or genjutsu levels aren't really relevant into it. Well, I think Swag took that more into consideration because he's like, Madara, big power buff, he excels in genjutsu, stuff like that. But the theory of him having two different levels of Kodo Matsukami is interesting. I don't know if you've ever talked about it, TG, but
Nah.
I don't think it's like, I think it's definitely plausible, but I don't think we've seen enough for me to say that, like, it is concretely this, or like it's very little to assume off of. That's at least for me. I don't know. Maybe if we were in a debate, I could argue off of it, but I think it's very flimsy. So
Yeah.
I'm personally not. I don't roll with the idea of his right eye has one ability and has its own time frame of utilization, and then his left eye has its own ability and its own utilization. I don't personally roll with that. If you guys do, that's 100% fine. Just something I don't personally roll off of.
I guess we can get into the what if now, like how we really would see this fight going. I guess I'll lead with this with how I see this like scenario going. I guess it's like I'm gonna just paint it very clearly that they just like Shisui encounters Obito, possibly like when he's gonna do the Kodo Matsukami on Fugaku, or during like the clan massacre itself or the aftermath. So the way I see this fight going, right, I'm not gonna rule out Kodo Matsukami off rip, but I do want to bring up the fact that Chisui doesn't really like, he doesn't give off like the vibe to me that he would use it like off rip in a combat scenario. It's more so like this technique of negotiation for him to prevent, certain nations from colliding. I didn't really get the idea, even from his fight with Danzo in both, the anime and game canon. He never really gives off the idea that he uses it in like this combat setting. Not to say he can't, I'm just saying that's not his first go-to. So saying like Kodo Matsukami comes out first, I don't think it's gonna happen. I don't. Do you agree, Bro? I don't really see it like happening at all, really.
To add on to that, I think you could also argue that maybe Kodo Matsukami needs a time of preparation, because we see that like he has to prepare,
because Chisui just does not have like prep. And the Minato example of that fight, had Minato not had flying Raijin, that fight would have ended instantly, because Obito was able to grab him, and like he was sucking him into the dimension. So it's very possible, and I think it's very likely that if Obito does end up grabbing him, whether he sees him like preparing a Kodo Matsukami, or maybe they encounter each other just randomly, that is a GG for the fight. Now let's say Obito doesn't grab him and a fight commences, right? It's definitely gonna be a lot of feeling each other out, with like pretty much like Shisui kind of doing his body flicker dance, and Obito just kind of phasing through. A lot of intel gathering gonna happen during this fight. But I do want to say, I believe it is more plausible to say like Obito would have intel on Shisui at this point, especially since Shisui and his name is like more well known he's got like a reputation for certain things. So I feel like Obito also would be more prepared for this fight than Shisui, just regarding intel and techniques, which, you know, is also, you know, pretty, yeah.
Granted, I would say it wouldn't be by a ton, just because it would be more off of like the lore and
Exactly.
stories he's heard of it. So it's not like Obito has like a Bible written on Shisui and he's gonna be like,
Yeah.
when he walks 2 steps forward, I'm gonna Kamui behind it. It's not gonna be like that.
Yeah.
It's more like, yeah, it's gonna be based more off of like he's at least heard of the body flickers in the Kodomatsu comic. That's what it's gonna be like, Leon.
Yeah, and we can definitely see some playing around in this scenario. You know, Shisui is going to be body flickering around and Obito is just going to be comboing. Now, whether or not Shisui can actually tag Obito does somewhat depend on like kind of where you scale them a little bit, who you think is kind of higher. Maybe Shisui has like the base stats of like Minato, to where like if he does catch Obito lacking at this point with him materializing him, he's able to tag him. Or maybe you don't think like Shisui's on that level. But to say like, in my opinion, I don't think body flicker alone would be enough to get Obito to like materialize, or not materialize, but for Shisui to tag him in the same sense Minato did. What's your kind of like idea on that? Do you really see Shisui like super tagging him like that?
I think if you do take what he does as a kid, where he does have like basically visual doppelgangers of just speed, that is a ridiculous like amount of speed he's producing to have that many forms. Maybe it is shadow clones. Maybe you could argue that as well. But I don't think he ever used shadow. I'm pretty sure actually it is just
it's like after images. It's like body flickering everywhere at once. Yeah.
I think even the argument of that being shadow clones, I think that's irrelevant.
Yeah.
But that is, if we are saying that like they are relative, I don't think that Obito could even catch him really, just by how fast that he is producing. I wish I had the calc on me.
Yeah.
Or if I remember the numbers, but that is like such a ridiculous amount that he is multiplying his speed by to produce multiple doppelgangers of visuals just by speed alone.
Yeah. So if anything, right, it's more of like an earlier like to mid fight scenario where Obito just dominates and cleans like earlier in the fight, to where like mid fight Chisui could definitely have the potential to gain some momentum with some of his techniques. There's also the Susanoo. I'm of the opinion it might honestly work against Chisui in the fact that Obito would just phase through everything and phase through the Susanoo and grab him. I guess the flip side is like it also could reveal an opening, and let's say Shisui starts body flickering with the Susanoo. Like it's kind of funny to imagine a bunch of Susanoo just like going at Obito, but you know Obito would just remain phasing at this point. So I think it could work as like it might be a double-edged sword, but I think more often than not it might actually end up hurting Shisui though, just because it might give him like some sort of a pretense that he has this defense that wouldn't matter against Obito. Or you know, maybe his attack where he shoots a barrage of needles is like so fast it just blitzes Obito. But that's kind of like my opinion on that little bit. What about you, Vora?
I do want to ask, because I don't recall Obito ever using shadow clones. I'm not saying he doesn't have the ability to, but I don't ever remember him using it. Like let's say if Obito doesn't for some reason have the ability to, because we've never seen it, which is a fair argument. Chisui, who we have seen, at least if I'm remembering right, it was either in the games or in the Itachi flashbacks.
Yeah.
That was the way how Naruto figured out or it was able to punish Obito for teleporting and phasing between the dimensions.
Yeah.
You could also use that as well to Shisui's like win con, if you want to use that. Due to the fact that we've not seen Obito use it.
I feel like it'd be weird to say I think they both just have the ability, especially since like Genin for their exam have to produce at least one shadow clone. So to say like
actually a clone.
Yeah, like
clone.
Just a clone.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's like to say they can both clone themselves is like not outlandish at all to really say. I mean, neither of them have really shown the same like proficiency as like someone like Naruto or maybe like Tobirama, who like, you know, invented it. But yeah, I don't know. I can't really see the shadow clone either being like a big thing in this fight. But I think that's really out of 10, right? I want to get your opinion on this. Like, how do you see this fight going? Like total times, like who in whose favor? Like what's your take on it? I'm gonna give mine.
I think we do give the benefit of the doubt to Shisui, which we left both kind of the scaling loose at the beginning just because there is not a ton known. So we just had to go off of lore and statements and stuff like that. But if we do give the benefit of the doubt to Shisui, I do think Shisui does take it like 6 or 7 out of 10 times. If we don't, I will probably say Obito wins 6 or 7 out of 10 times.
Yeah, I think it's very determined on like who you lean towards with their respective scaling and lore, which are very similar. I look at it a little bit different way. I think if this fight either ends very quickly or it's more of like a drawn out battle, similar to what Minato and Obito did. I think Obito would take it a bit more likely, but that's only because I see him with the early GG being a big possibility and a really likely, because that is how he catches a lot of opponents. So I would lean in the other direction, like probably Obito, like 6 out of 10. But yeah, I think that's really it. And also, you know, just depends on like who you think scales higher. So I think that's really it. Any closing thoughts? Anything like that?
I mean, funny enough, we've actually done a video on like this exact same topic, but a little different. Yeah, I think like if we wanted to go like more balls to the wall scaling, you could. I think there's actually better ways to scale Shisui if we wanted to go more balls to the walls. But yeah, I would say like it's a pretty close match.
Yeah,
I don't think it's not at all one-sided.
They're very comparable. These are very two comparable characters. So like it going either way is not like outlandish. Just there's a couple factors that are like, you know, you got to look at. But I think that's really it. We set our piece. So, you know, with that being said, make sure to like and subscribe. And go subscribe to Voro. Do all of that. And I think that's it. So I'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.